Hello, my name is Shehzad Ghias and I'm the host of the podcast, The Pakistan Experience. The reason I prefer the format of the podcast is in a long conversation, you can add nuance, you can add context, you can develop a deeper understanding of any issue. The Piers Morgan show is the polar opposite of that. That show is designed for verbal volleys, it's designed for confrontation. So, unfortunately, the merits of the argument were not thoroughly examined as they should have been. And the irony of a Brit getting Pakistanis and Indians to fight each other are not lost on me. I've already talked about the rest of the show and the controversies, but I was in the waiting room, so I was unable to hear Wesley Clark's part at the start. I've now seen it, so I would like to address things that he has said at a very surface basic level. My initial comment is that the idea of terrorism has been very malleable for the West and the world in general in terms of what agenda they want to promote when. Last night or the night before, Trump was greeting a man who was recently on the most wanted terrorist list around the world with a 10 million bounty on his head. But suddenly, when America needed him, he became a national hero, and that is how he was sold to the West. So this idea of what is terrorism and what is not has also been historically malleable. So frankly, I was quite shocked to see Wesley Clark right at the start say, "Is a logical response from India to assume there was a premeditated and coordinated attack by the Pakistani military. In a world where India has not provided an iota of evidence, not a shred of evidence, the reason the entire discussion was reduced to the clown show that you ended up seeing is because nobody really wants to address the fact that there is simply no evidence. Let alone evidence not being provided to Pakistan, because the argument that is made is that in the past we've provided evidence to Pakistan and Pakistan has ended up doing nothing. Well, the world has an international media, the world has United Nations, there are international forums at play. If India is a responsible nation, it should have taken that evidence to other countries, to international media organizations. If you want to paint Pakistan as a terrorist state, as a pariah state, as a problem for the world, and you have the evidence proving that the Pakistani military committed a terrorist act in Pakistan, in India, why would you not show that evidence? The fact that you don't makes one guess that you don't have anything, which is why these discussions go off into tangents like, this is what Pakistan has historically done, this is who Pakistan are as people, which is the argument that Ranveer made, which sort of ticked me off, that this is who Pakistanis are. Even when Hina Rabbani Khair was making the argument that Pakistanis are honest people, Ranveer Allahabadiya started chuckling. So the arguments get reduced to the fact that this is who Pakistanis are, this is what they always do, because the truth of the matter is there is not a single piece of evidence that India has provided to anyone proving that Pakistan committed terrorist acts in Kashmir. Wesley Clark is a general who served in the US Army, so I'm not sure if in his worldview a country can decide to go to war based on flimsy evidence. The United States famously went to war in Iraq over the entire weapons of mass destruction lie, which turned out to be a complete fabrication. Unfortunately, this is not the first time the United States has done this. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, where the US's destroyer Maddox was on a intelligence mission when it claimed on 4th August that it was attacked. Years later, it was revealed that nothing happened on the night of the 4th. But that was used as a pretense to go to war with North Vietnam. A testimony was faked, the famous Nayara testimony at the US Congress. That testimony, where the girl claimed that Iraqi soldiers were committing crimes and brutalities against the Kuwaiti people, including attacking premature babies. That testimony turned out to be a complete lie. So the United States has repeatedly gone to war based on assumptions, based on fabrication, based on lies to further their state agenda. They have used international concepts such as terrorism, such as international law to their advantage to achieve their political goals. Famously, the United States also suffers from the US industrial military complex, which pushes the United States into forever wars because that is good for business. All these weapon manufacturers have people on their payrolls. These connections can be researched by looking at how many people who serve in the US administration and the US military end up in top positions at these firms after retiring. So this connection between the government, the military, and weapons manufacturers ensures that there are a lot of hawkish generals who not only push the United States into war, but also push other countries around the world into war, because like I said, war is good for business. The world has seen wars where both sides have used US weapons against each other. Regardless of who dies, the United States of America makes money. I think the brilliance of the narrative setting that is done by India and the communications is that they always ensure that the entire focus of the conversation is shifted to Pakistan always supporting low-level insurgency or militancy in Kashmir. So the conversation is never about the people who matter the most, the people of Kashmir. They're never put front and center of any conversations about Kashmir. They're never discussed, they're never invited on international forums to discuss these issues. International journalists do not go to Kashmir and give voice to the voiceless people of Kashmir, because on either side of the border, regardless of what your political affiliations are or which country you live in or which country you're watching this from, the fact of the matter is, whether you're on the Pakistan side of Kashmir or whether you're on the Indian side of Kashmir, these are the people who are suffering the most. These are the people who have the right to self-determination, which is being trampled. When these incidents happen in Pakistan, the conversation is always about the rights of the people who are indigenous to this land. Balochistan is a flashpoint and has been a flashpoint throughout most of the history of Pakistan. But the conversation after terrorist attacks take place in Pakistan, regardless of the establishment or the military, blaming India for them is on the legitimate grievances of the Baloch people. I personally have hosted multiple podcasts discussing in detail the legitimate grievances of the Baloch people, leading to a resistance movement in Balochistan. However, nobody in India dares to give the microphone to the people of Kashmir, to put them front and center, to have that conversation. And that is the brilliance of India narrative setting about Kashmir, about shifting the entire spotlight on Pakistan, about making the entire conversation about Pakistan supporting militancy and terrorism, so that nobody has the conversation, which is the need of the hour, about the legitimate rights of the people of Kashmir, about India's repression in Kashmir. And if somebody wants to have a tit-for-tat conversation about Pakistan's repression, I'm happy to have that conversation. I've had those conversations multiple times on my podcast. I am now looking in the eyes of my Indian counterparts and asking you the question: do you just see Kashmir as a territory, or do you genuinely believe that the people of Kashmir are also equal citizens? If they are, why are they not invited on your podcast? Why are they not given a microphone? Not as token representatives of success stories, but to tell the true plight of the people of Kashmir. For somebody who's interested in finding out more about this, on a fictional level, I believe the movie Heather does a brilliant job, but you might actually go and read the actual law. If you don't believe me that the people of Kashmir in India do not have equal rights or their civil liberties are being trampled upon, the Indian Army Special Forces Act clearly lays that out. That the people of Kashmir are lesser than. That the people of Kashmir do not have as much rights as the other citizens of India. And those voices are never heard. Even during the recent conflict, the people of Kashmir were the ones who were sandwiched between India and Pakistan. If I am to draw an analogy, it felt like two bitterly divorced parents pulling a child apart limb to limb because they'd rather see the child die than be given to the other. And that is the story of Kashmir that is never told. And if somebody thinks that I'm peddling Pakistan's narrative officially might be that the stand for the people of Kashmir, but Pakistan and India both would rather nuke each other and kill 1 million people or so than give up their half of Kashmir. The independence of Kashmir may have been on the table. The cold hard truth may have been on the table historically, but the cold hard truth of the present circumstance is that that possibility, or that sliver of possibility, is looking increasingly unlikely. India and Pakistan have firmly put their boots on the ground. De facto, the line of control between the two countries is international border, and as much as India would like to posture that they're going to reunite Kashmir and take over the entire property, take over the entire territory, including the half that Pakistan has, like I said, Pakistan would rather nuke them than give up Kashmir. And India would rather nuke Pakistan than give up Kashmir. And both countries would nuke each other before letting Kashmir be independent. So what the people of Kashmir want, the Kashmiris, who are the most important people, who are the most important voices in this entire discussion, are the ones that are the most marginalized, are the ones that are the most ignored, are the ones not given any platforms around the world. And to ensure that that happens, India makes sure that the conversation is about Pakistan supporting low-level insurgency and militancy in Kashmir, and not having the conversation about India's repression on the people of Kashmir. Because bear in mind, wherever there is repression, there is resistance, and that resistance sometimes tends to be militant. And if I may talk about my country, the resistance in Balochistan is supported. There is ample evidence that it's supported and at times funded by India, which I'm going to get to. But the entire conversation, the entire discussion that I've ever had about Balochistan is about the legitimate grievances of the people of Balochistan. So my plea to international media is, rather than inviting hawkish generals or podcasters like me, if you want to discuss Kashmir, if you want to understand Kashmir, invite the people of Kashmir. Give them a voice. Not only has India ensured that the conversation is never about their aggression and their absolute belligerence and their flagrant violations of international law and borders that they showed, the conversation is not about the suppression of people as well. It was the same as how the conversation was hijacked after October 7th. Haaretz, the paper of record, the official paper of record in Israel, right after October 7th, reported that what happened is due to the policies of Netanyahu, is due to the brutal occupation, is due to the continued subjugation of the people of Palestine and their rights not being granted to them. The newspaper in Israel was brave enough to speak the truth. But international media made sure that the focus is on October 7th, and anything that Israel does after that, including the genocide of the Palestinian people, including not seeing any single soul in Gaza as a citizen, is seen as a response to what happened on October 7th. And then the conversation becomes, what else is India to do? What else is Israel to do? This is called a Freudian slip. What else is Israel to do but to respond? Israel has no option but to bomb children for 2 years because October 7th happened. And that is the argument India is trying to take. India is taking a leaf out of the playbook of Israel. And the way they've controlled the narrative around the world, or the way they've communicated, has successfully made people buy into the Indian narrative, has made people ignore the real conversation that needs to be had, which is the suppression of the people of Kashmir. What has been reported that Donald Trump posted on the alt-right social media app, Truth Social, is that he is going to now take an interest in Kashmir and hopefully find a resolution for it. This has angered New Delhi. New Delhi is seething at this suggestion. But what historically India has done has tried to prevent the issue of Kashmir from being internationalized. They have historically seen this as a bilateral issue. And recently they've seen it as India's internal issue, which it certainly is not. So I ask all my Indian counterparts, why is the conversation not about India not upholding United Nations and Security Council resolutions? Why has India not done a plebiscite in Kashmir? If you are to turn the gun around and blame Pakistan for everything that it has done in Kashmir, I'm happy to admit that both countries are at fault. I'm happy to move the conversation away from the terrible deeds of India and Pakistan to the people of Kashmir. For both countries to step aside a little and let the people of Kashmir decide what they want to do. And the international community has a burden and has a duty to the people of Kashmir and their right of self-determination. Why does India not let the United Nations or any international actors intervene if the conversation that they have, or the narrative that they said that there is a trust deficit or that Pakistan cannot be trusted? Let international bodies function. Let international laws function. Let the United Nations function. But I believe India has come to the conclusion, what has been clear to see for the world for years, but has been made abundantly obvious after Israel's onslaught in Gaza, that the United Nations only exists on paper. That international law is to be mocked with. When it was said that the ICJ, or it was suggested that the ICJ is only to be used for countries which are not Israel, the US, or the UK, or when they were reprimanded for issuing arrest warrants for Netanyahu, it was made abundantly clear that these international organizations are made to further the interests of the countries which are responsible for making them. They're not to be used judiciously for anyone looking for rights, for anyone looking for justice around the world. And India now believes that it has a seat on the same table. India now looks at the United States of America or China and thinks of themselves as equal. thinks of themselves as being able to get away with belligerence, with aggression, with flagrant violations of international law, with flagrant violations of the United Nations. And India's economic might ensures that international actors and international organizations are reluctant to act according to international law. Justin Trudeau openly accused India and the state of India of committing terrorism on Canadian soil. But Canada also had to back away because India decided to flex its economic muscle. The world order as it is designed ensures that those with the most economic might are able to bend international law to their will. And that is precisely what India is doing. India does not have any moral ground to stand on. They're trying to make the moral argument because they simply do not have any evidence to justify their actions. And if the argument that was made by Wesley Clark specifically is that India has not retaliated in the past, I believe that shows a real severe lack of understanding. It is the most ahistoric take that I've heard on India and Pakistan. It may be justified coming from a far-right Indian troll, but to see Wesley Clark say that on an international show was nothing short of a joke, with apologies. 1971. I truly believe that 1971 happened because of the failed policies of West Pakistan, whereas West Pakistan treated East Pakistan as a colony, did not treat them as equals. There was economic deprivation, there was cultural imperialism, there was racism. I fully support Bangladesh today as an independent nation, and I'm proud of the journey that they have taken. This is nothing against the indigenous movement for freedom for the people of Bangladesh. But it is undeniable that India supported, trained militant groups to commit what today India would call jihadi terrorism, just by virtue of the fact that it was Muslims committing it. That would be India's position if India was not the one training them, if India was not the one supporting them. And that is not something that they've done tacitly, that is something that they've done explicitly, that is something that Narendra Modi has boasted about. That is something that Narendra Modi has used to make the argument that, or at least insinuate that India might do the same thing in Balochistan. That kind of posturing is frequently done by Indian commentators. So the idea that this has been a one-way street is frankly ludicrous. And anybody who is not aware of such a simple historic fact, which is a part of public record, speaking about the issue of India and Pakistan, is comical. I'm happy to have the conversation with both countries, with mature minds like adults, have the conversation that both countries have funded, supported, propped up militancy in the other country. And it is not unique to India, it is not unique to Pakistan. Every warring country around the world, every country that sees the other as the enemy, has used militancy, has used intelligence to destabilize the other country. If we are to buy India's narrative setting today that Pakistan is a terrorist state, because just by virtue of the fact that terrorists are present in Pakistan, then my simple question to Wesley Clark is, which country has supported the most or funded the most armed groups around the world? Which country has propped up most militant groups and insurgencies around the world? I think the answer is clear for anybody with a passing interest in world history. So if we are to make the argument that if you support terrorists around the world or terrorist groups around the world, you're a terrorist nation, then my simple question to Wesley Clark is that, let's start with the top. What country comes to mind? Trust me, it's not Pakistan. Based on how the narrative was said, or how Piers Morgan must have been briefed in his simple understanding of the world, his idea was that terrorism happened in Kashmir, and how was India not to respond? I doubt he was even aware of the fact. It may be because India is an economic superpower. It has the eyes of the world. IPL is happening in India right now with players from around the world in India present. He may not even be aware, or you may not be even aware, that terrorist attack of equally, if not a lot more, vile behavior occurred in Pakistan, where a train with over 350 passengers was hijacked, 64 people were killed. People's identifications were checked, confirmed, and they were murdered accordingly, much like Pahalgam. Pakistan, much like India, blamed the other country. Pakistan made the case through multiple press conferences, even purporting to provide evidence, including an audio recording that they claim to be one with somebody from the Indian military communicating with the terrorists. At least some evidence was provided. But even if we are to reject that evidence altogether and see it as a complete fabrication, there is complete symmetry in a terrorist attack happening in the country and the military establishment of that country, along with the government, blaming the other country for it. If Pakistan decided to go to international bodies and seek international resolutions for that crime and to try and provide evidence that was India committing terrorism in Balochistan, why could India not do the same? Why is India not bound by the same international law that Pakistan is bound by? If Pakistan acted like a mature, responsible, modern nation, why can't India? So I frankly find the notion ridiculous that the straw manning of this entire issue, to frame it as that India had no option but to violate Pakistan's territorial sovereignty, our borders, to bomb Pakistan and murder children. It is undeniable that children died. India might make the claim that they were only attacking terrorist camps, but Irtada Abbas Turi died in his bed. This was a 7-year-old child sleeping at home at night. And India might make the argument that that child was at a terrorist camp. How ridiculous do you have to be to think that a 7-year-old child was frolicking about at a terrorist camp at 3 a.m.? This argument only comes from the perverse minds that make the argument that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. And that is what India is now that is the narrative that India is now trying to create for the world. That there are no innocent civilians in Pakistan. If a 7-year-old child is to die, then he must be a terrorist. Or if not, he's going to grow up to be a terrorist. And that is the danger that we're arguing against. If we let India set this narrative such that it gives carte blanche for India to bomb Pakistan, to act like a rogue state, to act like a regional hegemon, then the international order, which has already broken apart after Palestine, breaks apart even further. Then the United Nations is seen as even much more of a joke than it does now. And if we are to believe India in their argument that Pakistan is the purveyor of terrorism in the world and those actions are not done due to inefficiency but are done due to malice, then my argument to them is, then why have we suffered the most? If we're exporting this poison around the world, then why have over 100,000 people in Pakistan died due to terrorism? The Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan has committed numerous terrorist attacks in Pakistan, including attacking our armed forces right now. The BLA has committed over 300 attacks on the armed forces, security installations, and civilians in Pakistan. The BLA came out with a statement when India decided to attack Pakistan that they're going to be the Western Front for India. If that is not evidence enough, one might make the argument that that does not prove anything. That does not prove that India is supporting the BLA. That just proves that the BLA is trying to take advantage of a situation where the geopolitics may fall into their favor and they're trying to attack the enemy when they think it's at its weakest. I'm happy to buy that argument. But let's now look at what the Indian government or the Indian security officials have said, because even for Pahalgam, the argument that India is making is that they're pointing towards General Asim Munir's speech, a speech that I have also criticized. But in 2014, the Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval asked for defensive offensive. He clearly stated that if Pakistan does one more Mumbai, then it will lose Balochistan. Narendra Modi in 2016 himself mentioned Balochistan with Kashmir. So the posturing of India in Balochistan is that they have expressed public support for the movement in Balochistan, for separatism in Balochistan, which is militant, which is terrorists, which is full of terrorists, which has committed terrorist acts, And I'm not going to make the mistake that the Pakistani establishment does, which conflates the legitimate movement for human rights in Balochistan with terrorists in Balochistan. I see them as two completely separate, unrelated movements. Maharang Baloch is currently in prison, which is state repression, which I'm against, and I've repeatedly spoken for the rights of Maharang Baloch and for Maharang Baloch to be released. I fully support her movement for the legitimate rights of the people of Balochistan, but I fully oppose terrorist acts by the Balochistan Liberation Army. Maybe the best evidence that India is behind the terrorist acts that are committed in Balochistan is Kulbhushan Yadav, who India has accepted is a former naval officer, who Pakistan claims was working for RAW, India's intelligence agency. He was found in Pakistan. He was given a death sentence, but with international intervention, that was stalled, and he's currently in Pakistan's custody. We have an Indian spy. There is evidence that terrorists from the BLA received medical treatment in India. There are public statements by people who claim to lead different factions in the BLA, tacitly accepting, if not explicitly, funding from India. So if the argument is that Pakistan is the only one supporting insurgency, militancy in the other country, we have admissions that that India did so when East Pakistan was a part of Pakistan, something that India is very proud of. Then we have evidence that India has threatened to do the same in Balochistan. Then we have India's fingerprints over terrorism in Balochistan. But when that argument is made, India tries to brush it off as it being a false equivalency. In my opinion, it is a true equivalency. If we are to reach a conclusion, if we are to reach a resolution, we need to act like adults. We need to have an honest conversation. We need to accept the fact that this is what both countries have been up to. Both countries have gone to war repeatedly against each other, and both countries have done covert operations, intelligence operations, including supporting terrorism in the other country. If we're going to pretend that it has been a one-way street and one of them has always been the victim, whereas the other has always been the perpetrator, this is not just a reductionist view of history, it's a complete lie. Now, on the point of Pakistan supporting terrorist groups, Khwaja Asif, the defense minister of Pakistan, went on Sky News to accept that Pakistan has, but it has done so at the behest of the United States of America and the United Kingdom. I don't think that is a statement that the defense minister of Pakistan should have been made. However, that statement is not without merit. If Khwaja Asif was sitting across the table with me on a podcast having a detailed discussion about all the mistakes that Pakistan has made, I would have appreciated him for being honest about the failed policies of Pakistan. But Pakistan is hardly unique. The United States has a million failed policies. India has a million failed policies. Pakistan has a million failed policies. And I don't think there is a failed policy of Pakistan that I have not discussed at length on this very podcast, sitting in this very room. However, I reject the notion that Islamic terrorism or jihadist terrorism or militancy or extremism is indigenous to Pakistan. In fact, I would also go to the extent of rejecting the idea that it is indigenous to the Islamic world. The flashpoint of the Islamic world is Palestine, and it has been for close to 80 years at this point. PLO, Yasser Arafat, the Palestine Liberation Organization, was a largely secular organization till it was deliberately sidelined. Islamic militant jihad is not an idea that was created in Syria, Afghanistan, or Pakistan. It was an idea that was created in Washington, D.C. Publications promoting Islamic militant jihad were printed in the United States of America and distributed in Pakistan. Pakistan's entire Western Front was used as a bulwark against communism. Islamic militant jihad was promoted around the world, where mujahideen were seen as heroes to promote United States political ideology, to defeat communism, to defeat what then the United States of America saw its enemy, communism and the Soviet Union. Pre the Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan, we do not see Islamic terrorism around the world. We do not see people blowing themselves up around the world. It is only after the creation of Mujahideen, and then particularly after 9/11, where the world was framed in terms of a binary where either you were with us or against us, and the enemy then was not communism, the enemy then was Islamic extremism, which made people conflate Islamic extremism with Islam altogether. And that worldview, where Muslims in general were seen as the enemy and Islamophobia was at its highest point, maybe in recent history, is when Islamic terrorism was proliferated around the world. It might become a detailed discussion, which I may not have time for today, whether multiple Islamic terrorist organizations, including ISIS, are truly Islamic, or they're used by the same interests that pretend to oppose it for furthering their political interests when it is convenient to them. However, if we specifically talk about Pakistan was used in the Soviet war in Afghanistan. Pakistan was a frontline state. Ziaul Haq sold off the western front of our country to the United States of America to recruit the people of Pakistan, to turn them into jihadis, to promote jihadist literature, again literature that was printed in the United States of America, to push our country into extremism, to promote a certain idea of Islam which is militant, which is jihadi. Again, it's a much longer conversation of how Pakistan, India, and this South Asia's Islam has differed from this modern jihadist Taliban ISIS understanding of Islam that we now see around the world. But rest assured, it has. Pakistan does not have a history of Talibanization or ISIS. It is only after the war in Afghanistan, after a decade of which, when America achieved its interests, it tried to wash its hands off the Taliban and left, only to return a decade later and tell Pakistan that these are now the enemy and they're supposed to be bombed. Again, turning the western front of Pakistan into throwing them into warfare. Burning the western front of Pakistan in a fire that eventually reached every single corner of Pakistan. General Pervez Musharraf pushed Pakistan into a virtual civil war, where Pakistan was being attacked by Islamic extremists. Pakistan was being bombed by the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, only for a decade or so later for America to leave the same Taliban in charge. The same Taliban that they had been telling us to bomb for a decade or so, Pakistan was told to recognize them as the legitimate government in Afghanistan, and the United States washed its hands off the region again, only to probably return 5-6 years later in the 2030s for another war. So is Pakistan meant to decide how to deal with these groups based on America's mood swings, based on what America's policy is that decade? And is Islamic militancy and Islamic terrorism and Islamic extremism a tap that Pakistan can turn on and turn off every time it suits America's interests? Is it really that simple to turn an entire province into a jihadi militant camp overnight, but when America's interests have been served and their war is over, to turn it off? To see Afghanistan as an intrinsic part of Pakistan and have these egotistical notions that it is somehow part of the strategic depth of Pakistan, and then to turn around and then see them as the enemies, to shore up the border and attack them, then to go back to seeing them as a government and having to deal with them. Currently, there's skirmishes both on our eastern front with India, but also on our western front with Afghanistan, where we may not be at war with Afghanistan, but there is no peace either. And this entire flashpoint, this entire debacle, is the making of the United States of America. So Pakistan currently exists with our eastern border aflame thanks to the United Kingdom, and our western border aflame thanks to the United States. In a state like that, Pakistan is also meant to ensure that all militant groups in the country are destroyed. Not sure whether 5 years later America will tell us to reinstate all of them as well. So fully acknowledging the fact that Pakistan has failed in its policies, that Pakistan has had egotistical generals and egotistical politicians who have pushed Pakistan into war, who have made the mistake of supporting militancy, who have made the mistake of promoting extremism. But let's contextualize this entire conversation in terms of the hurdles and the hardships Pakistan has faced as well, in terms of how we've been sandwiched between an antagonistic neighbor on the Eastern Front, thanks to the hastily done partition by the British. I'm happy to list the crimes committed by Pakistan and Pakistan's failed policies, as long as there is an acknowledgement that Pakistan is hardly unique when it comes to any of this. And Pakistan is hardly the original sinners in this regard. Let's have an honest conversation, and let's act like adults, and let's stop using this as a way to promote your narrative, which then labels Pakistan as the sole problem around the world, as the sole purveyor of terrorism around the world, as the sole rogue nation that cannot be dealt with, that cannot be talked to, that cannot be conversed with, and the only way to get rid of it is war or complete annihilation. That is the world that I'm arguing against. That is my problem with these narratives. That is why I'm fighting against them today, and that is why I was shocked to see Wesley Clark say what he did. It was quite rich coming from a general in the who has served in the United States Army.